Richmond County residents. Celeste Gotell coming to you from the Senior Center Without Walls for Richmond County with a brand new television series called Let's Talk Grief and Death Literacy. We're going to be exploring grief, loss, end-of-life planning, and many other conversations that help to support one another with compassion. This is all part of a bigger project called Approaching Death and Grief with Compassion and Understanding. Seniors Take Action Coalition applied for funding with a funding, I guess you'd call it a funding stream called Healing Pathways, which is part of the Nova Scotia Hospice Palliative Care Association. They provide funding to communities to do projects related to mental wellness, resilience, grief, loss, etc. And we were successful with that project, so we're really excited about doing a number of things over the coming year. One of the things we will be doing is just overall promotion to help increase people's knowledge and awareness about grief and death literacy, and we'll be doing it with this program. We'll have a number of guests over the next few months. We'll also be doing a number of social media posts to kind of start providing more information to people about grief and literacy. We'll certainly be profiling this topic a lot in our next few issues of Better with Age, our newsletter. And we're going to be having a big conference in October. So I'm really excited to have our guest this morning, who's Mary Ellen Macdonald. Now, Mary Ellen is an expert in this field, so I'm so excited to have her with us. She's an anthropologist. She's a professor of palliative medicine at Dalhousie University and is co-founder of a Canadian organization called Grief Matters. And that is a charitable organization that works to help all of us, from individuals to all of society, to better understand and to make room for grief through creative, community-based activities. Mary Ellen holds the J&W Murphy Foundation Endowed Chair in Palliative Care. She's been researching death, dying, and bereavement for 2 decades. Why, she's the expert, and is especially committed to supporting death and grief literacy across our diverse communities. So thank you so much for joining us, Mary Ellen. How are you today?
I am great, and I am so happy to be here. Thank you for the kind invitation.
Oh, that's great. So I've got a number of questions that I'm going to be asking you that will help us with our conversation this morning, and I'm sure our viewers will really enjoy hearing from you and hearing all about your insights, etc. So I thought we'd just start off with a question about Grief Matters. What is your organization all about? How did you become involved?
Well, you might have to cut me off because I can talk about Grief Matters all day. It started as a passion project that I developed with my dear colleague Susan Cadell, who's in Ontario, who's a wannabe Nova Scotian, we always say. So we actually started it in Nova Scotia, kind of off the sides of our desk. So we were working full time in academic roles, but as I said, this was a passion project, something we really had been thinking about a lot and wanting to advance in, like really saw a need in Nova Scotia and then more broadly in Canada to start these conversations or to advance conversations around grief. Because as you know, our title says, we believe grief matters. It really matters, and it's not getting the airtime that it needs and deserves. And so that was back in 2023. We started it just as a local organization, and then we advanced it into a nonprofit organization. And just recently, we have received charitable status. So we're really excited about that. And we're national now as well. We've expanded beyond Nova Scotia, as I said, because there is a need. It was kind of started in the spirit of, well, if you build it, hopefully they'll come. We didn't know at first, but wow, did people show up, because there was just this, as I said, that we felt and saw that there was this need to have kind of spaces to talk about grief. And we founded it on this idea of grief literacy. So grief literacy is a concept that, again, we're academics, and we had been developing this concept of grief literacy kind of from an academic and a public health perspective back in 2018. And then we published it, kind of a theoretical framework about grief literacy and what it is in
Mhm.
2020. And that word has just taken off. We didn't coin the term. We were, working with this
Mhm.
idea that was already out there, but we kind of put some meat to the bones and thought about grief literacy as being kind of this way to elevate all the boats in the harbor so that all of us could better understand,
Mhm.
like it's knowledge, better understand what is this thing called grief? Um,
Mhm.
what are the skills that are required to understand and support grief? And then what are the kind of the values that are required to really kind of advance this idea of community conversations, just like
Mhm.
you're doing in
Mhm.
your region about grief and grief literacy. And so it started as this organization, and we now have monthly blogs, we have monthly cartoons, we have monthly or bi-monthly newsletters, and we've just grown our community in beautiful ways right across the country.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And again, you're doing it right across the country, which, like you said, is a passion. And that's how you got involved. In very similarly is kind of how I got involved. This has kind of
Mhm.
become a new passion for me, having experienced some very recent grief myself, having experienced it throughout my lifetime, but certainly in more recent times that has kind of compelled me to do more work in this area. And it kind of aligned up very nice because Senior Take Action Coalition was involved with a research project called Acting Collectively. And we interviewed 222 older adults throughout Cape Breton, three counties in Cape Breton. Richmond County, 102 people participated. And one of the findings of that research, which is very important for us as an organization because it helps us to guide our priorities, is that the area of mental health and grief came up a lot for older adults. And when you have an aging population,
Yes.
people are experiencing more and more grief and loss, not only death, but other types of grief as well. So that kind of gave us a bit of almost kind of a guiding post, if you will, to know where we would want to invest some of our time and energy, which is precisely why we applied for this grant and why we're doing this work is to kind of help promote grief and death literacy.
Mhm.
So, how might we encourage conversations about grief and death?
I think from our perspective at Grief Matters, we really believe partly in modeling it. And just like you're doing in Richmond County. So modeling it, as I said, we have blogs that are written by us, but they're also written by guests. People just email us all the time and say, I have a story. It goes like this. What do you think? And we're like, wow, could we please share that with the world? Or I have a perspective. Please come to Grief Matters and share that with the world. Also, as I said, we have cartoons, same thing. People who are artists out there write to us and say, I have an idea for a cartoon. So partly it's kind of encouraging the conversation by modeling that all grief belongs here. All people need to be included and feel included in these conversations about grief. So that's I think that's kind of a foundational premise that we
Hmm.
have, like just go out there and try something and see if it works. Pop
Hmm.
up an event in your local community center, pop up an event Sunday after church, um, pop up an event in a school and see, like talk to people, see, well, what might work in this context? Let's
Hmm.
try it. It doesn't work? Okay, pivot,
Hmm.
try something else. It does work, grow it. Do it again. Do it in
Hmm.
another venue. Do it with another theme. So I think that you kind of have to have that first impulse, a little bit of, chutzpah or bravery sometimes, and
Yeah.
just get out there and just try it and see. And from my experience, you will be so surprised. People
Hmm.
will show up, people will respond, and they will thank you for giving voice to something that they didn't feel like they could actually
Hmm.
voice socially.
Yeah, that's great. And that's kind of what we've been doing is we've kind of been putting
Mhm.
our toe in the water, so to speak. Last year we started to partner with Bereaved Families Nova Scotia and hosted our first 6-week Living with Grief program where we had 10 people from the community join us for that. So that was kind of our first kind of segue into it. And then we applied for this project or are now launching this program and we'll be doing a lot of other things as well. What misconceptions about grief do you think are most common, Mary Ellen?
I think one of the big ones is that if you're grieving, you must need counseling.
Mhm,
And we hear that all the time. And sometimes it's said by, someone who's well-meaning, but they don't know
mhm,
what to do with your grief. And so they're trying to push you to a professional who could look after your grief because they just are at a loss for how to do it.
mhm,
Or they have that idea, well, if you're grieving, you need a professional who's going to fix you, and then you won't be grieving anymore, and then you can go back to work, and then you can be a productive citizen. And I mean,
mhm,
that, first of all, counseling can be fabulous. I don't want, I'm not saying that counseling is not important. It can be fabulous
mhm,
and really important for lots of people. At the same time, there's lots of grief that we carry that doesn't need counseling, but it does need an outlet. And if you don't have an outlet, if you don't have a peer support group, if you don't have a neighbor who will listen to you, if you don't have
mhm,
family members who can really listen and care and support you, then, maybe you do need to pay for a professional because at least they will listen to you. But
mhm.
there's lots and lots of grief that can be very, very well supported by, supportive community organizations like what you're talking about, by
Mhm,
supportive neighbors, by having a pop-up, group after church or, in the school that it doesn't necessarily need. So,
mhm,
try that first. And if that's not
mhm.
working, maybe then you do need to find a professional. But you
Yeah.
might be surprised that that's actually, you just need someone to listen and to care and
Mhm,
maybe to have some, empathy because they went through something similar, or at
mhm.
least they can, show up and listen to what you've been through.
Yeah, that's so true. Just having somebody who's willing to sit beside you and just be there with you as you kind of experience and walk through your grief. And I know a lot of other people told me that they've had success in kind of walking through their grief by doing things like gardening and music and yoga and all kinds of things that it doesn't always mean that you need to sit and talk to somebody. Sometimes the grief will come out in other ways as well. So yeah, that's so
Yes,
important.
100%. Yeah.
Um, if I were to, like, I'm really curious to know what do you wish others understood about the grieving process? And the reason I'm asking that question,
Mhm.
Mary Ellen, is that there's been a lot of talk about the stages of grief, and I think some people kind of go into a grief process expecting things to be very linear. So I wanted for
Yeah.
you to just kind of comment on that about the grieving process.
Yeah, the stages of grief, if only if there's one thing that we could take back from kind of grief conversations going back decades, that would be a big one because I think it's really done a lot of harm. This
Mhm.
idea that, grief is linear, as you say, and that it's going to have a timeline and that you're going to get to the end of it. Well, spoiler alert, it doesn't.
Mhm.
Um, and that's part of the beauty of grief too. Like that it's something that you will carry with you maybe your whole life because you only grieve things that were meaningful.
Mhm.
And so if you think about it, if you're grieving something that's meaningful and then it's going to end and you're not going to grieve it anymore, then there's kind of a sadness in that. Why would you
Mhm.
want to let it go? Why would you want to let those memories go? No, you get to carry them. But the,
Mhm.
the other side of that is it means it can be really, really hard.
Mhm.
Grief can be
Mhm.
incredibly hard. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think no stages, there's no timeline. So, a grief from 10 years ago can still feel very fresh because you have the anniversary, perhaps that the
Mhm.
anniversary when that person died, or
Mhm.
the anniversary when you moved away, or the anniversary when you got sick and you got your diagnosis. Like it can be years in the future and it can still hurt deeply.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's no timeline, there's no end point. Doesn't mean it's always hard. It can taper and it can taper in really beautiful ways so that what was very hurtful and painful can turn into something that's lighter and something that's beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those memories can transform over time, which is,
Mm-hmm.
the lovely side of grief. I
Mm-hmm.
think another thing that is kind of misunderstood or people aren't prepared for is, and this goes back to that idea of this linear trajectory, is that it can be really messy and it can be really unpredictable, where you get up in the morning and you think you're going to have a good day and woof,
Yeah.
you smell something like the someone's cooking muffins and it reminds you of muffins that, your grandmother cooked or whatever, or you're driving to work and you have to drive by the hospital or the vet clinic where your
Mm-hmm.
beloved animal was put down. So it can come at you in waves. It can come at you when you're not ready for it, with very, very unpredictable. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just, you can't fight it. I think
Yeah.
that's a big thing. Like, don't fight it. Lean in. Okay, there's the vet. Okay, calm, take a few breaths, and let's remember maybe some
Mm-hmm.
positive things about how that happened or whatever. I mean, you come up with little kind of tricks on your own
Yeah.
that'll help you get through the day. Um, so yeah, I think it can be very messy. And it also, I think sometimes people will try to compare their grief to other people's grief, and they'll be like, well, how come
Mm-hmm.
she's gone back to work? I don't feel ready to
Yeah.
go back to work. And then
Yeah.
judge yourself,
Mm-hmm.
harshly. But
Mm-hmm.
everybody, everyone's grief is unique. And everyone's process and going through grief, it's unique. It's unique to you. So, setting yourself up in a comparison will just set yourself up for a bigger challenge. It's already hard enough, so don't add
Mm-hmm.
to your challenges as you're grieving.
Oh yeah, that's very good advice because again, what I'm hearing you say is that grief is messy. Lean into it because it will, it can pop up at times when you're not expecting it. It's very individual, so don't compare yourself to others. And there are stages can go back and forth, and it's not linear in the process. So yeah, I'm like you. I wish all others kind of understood that is the process. And if we weren't feeling that grief as deeply as we were, it would mean that, that person or that pet or that job or that marriage or that child that moved away maybe wasn't as important to us as we originally thought. So we're having a conference in October that we've called Good Life, Good Death. It's a one-day conference that you're going to be our keynote speaker for on October 23rd. So we've decided to call it Good Life, Good Death because that's a term that's used often in this arena, if you will. So what does that mean to you when we talk about good life and good death?
I really love this phrase because I think what it does for me is it rebalances things. It brings a new balance. Like we often talk about a good life, right? But we don't often talk about a good death. But it's really important to hold both of those things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that there's lots of ways and important ways, through health and public health that we focus on a good life and well-being and wellness and exercise and
Mm-hmm.
nutrition and all of those things. And especially, when new beings are coming into the world and pregnant moms and families. And like, of course, you want to support a good life for everyone. That's a really solid Canadian value, certainly. Um, but we do it kind of at the expense of then also having the space to talk about what happens after,
Mm-hmm.
after the good life is over, and then we're heading towards end of life or death. Um, and then people who are living with that loss as well. And so that's why I really like this phrase, good life, good death, because it's much more holistic and it balances it
Mm-hmm.
really lovely in a lovely way. And it's not an or phrase, good life or. No, it's an and
Yeah,
phrase. It's good
yeah.
life and. And I think that's a really important kind of lesson and kind of touch point is how we can carry, two things can be true, as they
Yeah.
say, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can carry multiple things, and sometimes it sounds like a contrasting thing. Life and death is contrasting. No, it isn't. It's all part of the
Mm-hmm.
same continuum, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
hold it together in the same phrase, in this
Yeah.
and way, good life and good death, because it's
Mm-hmm.
all part of it. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's a great title.
Yeah, and I know that, we put a lot of energy and time into planning our good life, and not as much time is put into planning a good death. And I think
Yes.
part of the
Yeah.
education around grief and death literacy is to invite people to talk about this so that they are doing what's necessary to plan for the eventuality, because
Yes.
we do know that that's something that none of us can escape.
Yeah.
And some people's death can be very lovely, where you just live to be
Mhm.
85 years old and are illness free and go to sleep one night and, you know, are not
Yeah.
awake the next morning. Other people's death can be very painful process, etc. But
Mhm.
the more we can do to kind of prepare for it and prepare the people that we love around us to
Mhm.
expect it and to help them with it, the better off we're all going to be, I think, at the end of the day, for sure.
Yeah, and I really believe that we need to be doing that earlier, like not just for
Mhm.
older adults and not
Yeah,
just for adults at all, but for
yeah,
young people,
yeah,
starting so that it's more normal. It's
it
just
is.
part of how we think about life. Like thinking about life includes thinking about death. And I think we miss so many opportunities because I think as adults we're fearful of it, that we
Mhm,
don't then encourage the young people in our lives to
mhm,
reflect on it. Look, there's a leaf just fell off the tree. The tree, it's fall, and we're going to talk about things
mhm,
dying now, and there's a cycle of life. Like there's so many
mhm,
opportunities. One that I love talking about is the idea in a daycare where you have a goldfish that dies. And like there's an opportunity right there.
mhm,
Have a little funeral, have a little
mhm,
ceremony.
mhm.
Don't replace that goldfish and not tell the daycare children that it died. Um,
Exactly.
like there's so many opportunities that we miss to
Mhm,
talk more broadly about this, and the idea that a young person could grieve that goldfish or the
mhm,
plant that died, or the
mhm,
seasons changing. They
mhm,
carry grief, and I think there's so many opportunities for adults to learn from them as well,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, very well
It's
said.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
about, like, back to the daycare example, and when a child moves away. I was raised in a military family, and there was
Oh,
grief
yes.
associated with moving, because you were losing your friends and you'd have to learn to make new ones and stuff. So again, those kinds of conversations for a child, that is a type of grief as well. So, when people move away and talk about it, I agree. Yeah. Um, so, in your experience, I mean, you've got a lot of experience and know about a lot that's happening in communities across the country. How do different communities support people who are grieving? Because there are different ways in which different communities do it.
Yeah.
But some of your,
Yeah. Well, we really, like at Grief Matters, we fundamentally believe that grief literacy needs to be tailored to local communities. It's a grassroots idea, and it needs to
Mhm,
be rooted in the community, and it needs to make sense for that community. You can't come top down, right? It
mhm,
has to be bottom up.
mhm,
And there are
mhm,
so many lovely examples. And there's one that I just heard of recently in Southwest Nova Scotia, and it's a community that's building a wind phone. And some of your listeners will know what a wind phone is, some might not. So a wind phone is this structure that actually has a phone in it, or it doesn't actually need to be a structure, but the key thing is that there's a phone that's not attached to anything. So think of an old-fashioned phone that we used to have sitting on our desk or on the wall. Take
mhm,
it, put
mhm,
it, it's often put somewhere in nature. And it's this idea that came out of Japan after a tsunami hit Japan. And a local person was really, really missing their cousin who was swept away. I don't think they necessarily knew if the cousin was alive or dead, but the cousin was gone from the tsunami. And so this person set up a phone so they could pick it up and talk to the wind so they could talk to
Oh.
their cousin. And
Mm-hmm.
they did it just personally for themselves. And after they had used it a few times, the story goes, they kind of noticed that there were villagers lining up because they wanted to talk on the phone too, to
Wow.
their people who they
Mm-hmm.
had lost. And so this now has become a movement, a global movement, and they're
Mm-hmm.
popping up all over the world. But like to go back to your point about kind of community, what our community's doing, each community does it in its
Mm-hmm.
own way.
Mm-hmm.
They might put
Mm-hmm.
it in a nature park. They might put it on somebody's land. They might
Mm-hmm.
put it inside. They might put it outside. So this example I just heard about in Southwest Nova Scotia, in the village of Clare, is that they're putting a wind phone on the site of a beloved building that was burnt down by arson. And the community is
Oh,
grieving the
wow.
loss
Wow.
of this building. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where they've chosen to put their
Oh,
wind phone. Isn't that
yeah,
beautiful?
yeah, and that's what kind of like you say, that's what makes community special and people respond in a way. Like I know in Richmond County, in Almadam actually, there the Almadam Garden Club at one of our local community halls in Rocky Bay, there's a kind of a memorial garden that's been built there,
Yeah.
and it was originally in honor of one of the original members, a woman by the name of Anne England. And since that time, a couple of other key members from that community, from that garden club have since died as well. And one of them happens to be my aunt, who I referred to earlier as a recent, who was the president of that garden club, and they planted a tree in her honor. So that's kind of an example in our local community how some people are kind of dealing with grief. And then we have an organization called the Straight Palliative Care Society that offers
Mhm.
comfort in our community.
Yes.
And somebody's going to be at our conference actually talking about comfort teas. Hopefully that will kind of incite a lot of interest, and other communities will want to host them in going forward as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, so can you think of ways that communities could better support people that are grieving, or there just some simple
Yeah.
ways that we could be doing a better job at it?
Yeah. We really, really believe in these holding again, it's not or, it's and these two concepts together. And it is about normalizing grief and socializing grief. So normalizing it is just making it normal, like just understanding that people carry their grief with them. You can't leave it at home when you go to work. You can't leave it at home when you go to
Mm-hmm,
your faith organization. You can't leave it at home when you go to the grocery store. It comes with you. So it's normal that you might see people in the grocery store who like they get a side of an avocado and then they start crying because it reminds them of something that was
mm-hmm,
meaningful to
mm-hmm,
them and that it's okay
mm-hmm,
and it's should be normal. And then the other part is socializing it so that you're in a grocery store. It's a social space. Yes, grief can come here. You're in a
mm-hmm,
workplace. You're supposed to be productive and you find yourself crying. That's okay. You're in a social space, but we'll have Kleenex in our workplace. We'll have a quiet room in our workplace.
mm-hmm,
We will sensitize our workers that if there is someone who's grieving, maybe we'll take turns in showing up at their office door
mm-hmm,
with a muffin and a cup of tea and a listening ear or something
mm-hmm,
like that. So that,
mm-hmm,
or we hear someone whose, cat just died at work. So we often send flowers or condolences if it's a human, but not if it's an animal.
mm-hmm,
So let's
mm-hmm,
change our work practice. And we hear something like that, we're going to send flowers over, or we're going to donate to an SPCA or something in memory so that we're kind of
mm-hmm,
amplifying what we're doing. We're taking what was
mm-hmm,
already working, sending flowers when a human dies, and we're going to then adapt that when an animal dies, something like that. So
mm-hmm,
there's so many just little, none of it is rocket science
mm-hmm,
and none of it is expensive, right?
mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm,
it's just picking those little moments across the day, across the week, across the neighborhood, libraries are a really good example. Libraries are really great at, popping up a column with grief books. So it's not hidden in the back of the library. As soon as you walk in, oh, there's a display on grief,
Mm-hmm.
right? Again,
Mm-hmm.
it's become normal and it's social. The library is a very
Yeah.
social space. And so they're just welcoming the idea that, grief belongs here too, you know. And at the same thing, as I said
Yeah.
earlier, with daycares and schools, there is just so many. I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you a story that I heard. I was being interviewed by a journalist, and this happens a lot. People will, want to talk to me about grief, but because it's an assignment. So they're talking to me because they're supposed to talk to me about grief,
Mm-hmm.
but it will bring out their own personal experience. And so off
Mm-hmm.
record, they'll then tell me a story about something that happened to them. And this was a story about a woman whose parents had a parent had died, so her child's grandparent had died.
Mm-hmm.
And so they went to the funeral. It was in another province, and then came back home, and the child had to go back to school. It was a young child. I think he was maybe 6, let's say. And so the parent brought the child to school, and the teacher gave the parent a button and said, when your child's having a difficult day because of what they've just experienced, put the button on the backpack, and I will know to be more attentive to that child.
Oh, nice.
And
Mm-hmm.
like that's an example of a grief literate teacher
Yeah.
who's doing something very tailored to her
Yeah.
classroom and not expensive, doesn't take a lot of effort, but is
Yeah.
so like that mother felt comforted. It gave the teacher a
Mm-hmm.
tool to be able to be a better teacher to help that
Mm-hmm.
child. And then the child, like everyone wins in that
Yes, of
scenario.
course, of course. That's
Yeah.
a lovely
Yeah.
story. And that's
Yeah.
kind of, the whole name of our project is called Approaching Death and Grief with Compassion and Understanding, which is kind of that's what it's all about. I know that in my case, my brother who passed away a couple of years ago now, was a very creative individual, made a lot of
Yeah.
things, and he made rings. And I have one of his rings that I wear, and I find myself using it as a bit of how they have those rings that you can kind of swirl around, and they're kind of
Hmm.
like an energy ring or a comfort ring.
Yeah.
Well, it's big enough that I'm able to do that. So I find that sometimes I just need to touch that, and
Yeah.
kind of it brings a bit of comfort for sure. So,
It's funny that you're saying that, Celeste, because I'm playing with a ring right now and it's the
oh,
exact, and I have matching rings. And it was from a dear friend of
yeah,
mine who
yeah,
died. And
something,
we
yeah,
do that. Yeah, we do
yeah,
that all the
something
time.
very
Yeah.
simple. So just
Yeah.
a couple more questions for you
Yeah.
before we wrap up, Mary Ellen. One is, what do you think are the barriers that prevent people from talking openly about death and
Mm.
grief?
I think one big barrier is this concept called kind of toxic positivity, where we're supposed to always be positive. And like, don't be
Mm-hmm.
a downer and don't bring us down. And we don't want to we want to be happy today and we want to smile
Mm-hmm.
today and let's be upbeat. And that's all very, very lovely. And again, it's not or, it's and there's going to be people in your midst who that's not going to work for at this particular moment for lots of really important reasons.
Mm-hmm.
If you're having, what we call a griefy day, it can be so just aggressive and offensive to be in a scenario where it's like you're not allowed to carry that in with you. You're supposed
Mm-hmm.
to smile and you're supposed to be happy, and
Mm-hmm.
that makes it that much worse and that much heavier. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's really about ensuring that there are spaces for all emotions, there are
Mm-hmm.
spaces for all feelings. And yeah, of course, we need to control them and we have to show up at work and we need to be productive and all of that. It's not to take away any of that. At the same time, we need pop-off valves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in all
Mm-hmm.
of our contexts, we need to be like, I don't mean to offend you, but I need to get up and take a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if I get up and take a minute, someone will follow me and support me, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to, okay, go take a minute and leave the room by yourself, be more isolated and lonely. And when you're ready, come back and smile again. That's not like, that's not human. It's just
And what did
not.
you call that? Toxic positivity.
Positivity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a new term to me, and certainly I get it. I get it big time. Just like you're, normalizing and socializing. Like I just love that, way of kind of framing what we need to do
Yeah.
to better support people in communities. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to give you the last word, and you've already given us a lot of great examples and ideas about how we can better support communities. But if there was kind of one final thing that you'd like to kind of share with our guests and our viewers, what would that be in terms of the work we're doing in Richmond County and how we can um, continue on with this work in a way to try to engage people and invite people into the conversation? Because, as you said, grief matters.
I think, one of the biggest lessons for me, in all of this has been learning how to be a better listener
Hmm.
so that everyone can be included, right? And that I don't know who needs to be included. I need to listen, ear to the ground to hear who's
Hmm.
feeling excluded, who wants to come in, who wants to be included, and how can we make sure all of these things that we're doing are as absolutely inclusive as possible. And I think, grief has uh, has learned a lot. It used to be you could only grieve a relative that was, close to you. You couldn't grieve a distant relative, for
Hmm.
example. You couldn't grieve a neighbor. You couldn't grieve a friend. So I think we've learned a lot about human grief.
Hmm.
But also, as you were saying earlier, children grieving that they have to move and they're losing their friends. Like there's grief in everything that,
Hmm.
as we said, was meaningful. And so,
Hmm.
really, to be as expansive as you can. That doesn't mean you shouldn't also have tailored events. This is for people who've lost a pet. This is for people who've lost
Hmm.
a child. Like, of course,
Right.
you need to have tailored events as well. But it's really about, and the difference between listening and hearing. Like, listening is being present and taking in
Hmm.
so that you can then learn and be empathetic. And whereas hearing is about hearing something and then responding, right? With
Hmm.
how to fix it. It's
Right.
not about grief. It's not about fixing grief. We can't fix grief. Grief fixes us, right? We don't fix grief. It
Hmm.
changes who we are. So
Hmm.
we shouldn't go in hearing it so that we can turn it around and fix it. We should go in listening so that we can understand how broad grief can be, how grief can show up so differently for different people in different contexts.
Hmm.
And it's only then that we can really create supportive organizations that can show up in ways that are
Hmm.
helpful.
Hmm. That's wonderful. So, folks, that kind of concludes my conversation with Mary Ellen Macdonald, who is the co-founder of Grief Matters, and as I mentioned earlier, is going to be our keynote speaker at our conference on October 23rd, Good Life, Good Death. I'll be having a number of other guests in the coming months that I'll be inviting to the show to share more information about all things related to grief and death literacy. I want to thank you once again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in October when you come to our beautiful Almadam.
Wonderful. How wonderful.